Aloha and bam! Welcome to Action Movies, Storytelling Through Action. This is a podcast where I talk about some of my favorite action movies and what makes them great. Now, this particular episode is kind of an orientation episode as to what this podcast is going to be about. I'm Matthew Salanoa. I'm a director and filmmaker of over 17 years. I've made documentaries, short films. I've worked on mostly independent movie and student sets, although I've been on a couple professional sets. And I wanted to make this podcast as a resource for young filmmakers and fans of action movies who just want a little bit more in-depth look at what we should be looking at when we watch action movies. I do think there tends to be a lot of trends in how people think, and I'm not interested in trends. What I'm interested in is what works, because what's made me succeed as a video editor, as a director of the award-winning 007 I Only Need One, what has always made me succeed whenever I worked for any client is that I don't just watch movies and trust what some reviewer says. I watch movies and I try to figure out how they work. And I wanted to make this podcast as sort of a compendium of everything I've come to learn about what makes movies work. And at the end of the day, it's always storytelling. There's a reason why, someone can be incredibly successful on YouTube because they're excellent at making content. And then when they try to make a movie, it completely fails, it loses money, no one's interested, it's not working, it's a bad movie, and they just can't figure out why. And to me, the reason why is because you're just not that much of a film student. You may love movies, but you have to actually understand what it is on a fundamental stage that as a storyteller, your job is to be a communicator of what a character is going through. And that is the prism through which I judge every movie. And in particular, I'm going to establish a rubric. This podcast is going to be my rubric for how I judge every movie, but in particular, how I judge action movies. Because the action genre is still a form of storytelling. There is still a common attitude that I remember it was a review, it was a critic's response to one of the Matrix sequels that he said, I like my action movies dumb and stupid. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like a good dumb action movie that you don't have to think that much about, that's totally fine. But that is not the job of the storyteller. The storyteller may choose to make that, but if you are a true storyteller, then you look at every movie, no matter what the genre is, as a way to tell stories. So in this episode, I have a rubric, which is just 3 questions. I look at the movie and I ask these 3 questions, and if the movie has a good answer to these 3 questions, that to me is what makes it a successful movie. So here we go. I'm going to get into the 3 questions, and then I have 3 movies that exemplify and have answers to these questions. So here are the questions. First, how does the action define the character? Second, how does the action scene affect the rest of the story? And number 3, what is the meaning and or consequences of the violence? Notice that for this question, I turn action into violence because at the end of the day, action most of the time is violence. Adventure, if you look at Indiana Jones, not all of what happens to Indiana Jones is necessarily violence. Sometimes it's adventure, which is, yes, your heart is pounding. Yes, Indiana Jones is in danger, but he's not fighting someone. He's not enduring some sequence where, people are dying. Sometimes he himself might die, but it's because of a trap that he unleashed or because he's on a raft going over a river or something like that. That's adventure. But action typically tends to be some level of violence between characters. And so, again, this podcast is about celebrating exactly how the action sequences work to define the characters, how do they build into the story, and what is the deeper meaning or consequence of that action. Or, again, the last question is violence. And I'll get more into that with the third example. So my first example is, I've already talked about this a lot on this channel, or a fair amount. I love the Blade trilogy. This is a trilogy that only gets better with time, and especially with the first Blade movie. For those of you who don't know Blade, Blade is, at least as far as the movie goes, Blade is a half human, half vampire who hunts vampires. That's what he does. That's his function. That's his purpose in society. In a way, you could say Blade is the evolution of the Van Helsing type of vampire hunter. And also the evolution of both the kind of invincible Western hero, such as Clint Eastwood or the Terminator. I think what was wonderful about Blade's appearance at the end of the 90s is that he essentially took the place of the Terminator that had been established by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was our previous huge cultural invincible hero, who again took the place of Clint Eastwood, who took the place of John Wayne. So the Western hero tends to be this invulnerable hero whose mission is to rescue innocent people from the wicked. So in the case of Blade, I'm going to talk about the opening scene. So I'm not going to spoil the whole movie for you. I just want to explain to you how my rubric works. So the opening scene of Blade, we have this young couple going on a drive. This young woman takes a young man to this underground club in a meatpacking facility. And it seems at first to be one of those crazy great rave spots that you would want to attend. Everyone's dancing, they're rocking hard. You can tell that everyone here is having a great time as far as clubs go. The music is excellent. And then all of a sudden, blood starts pouring out of the sprinkler system. And this is what's called the famous blood rave sequence of Blade. And this guy comes to find out that the girl who brought him here is a vampire, and that in fact he is the lone human amongst all these vampires. And not only that, he's going to be their food. So immediately as the blood starts pouring, he realizes he's dancing in blood and wants to get out of there. He freaks out. He starts getting beat up by these vampires. And so even before Blade shows up, let's talk about how these vampires are established. Okay, now this is a violent scene, right? This is not an action scene. He's being violently attacked by these vampires. But what is this opening blood rave expose to us about these characters? It shows that the vampires are deceptive, they're sadistic, and also they're deeply sexual beings. So they have no inhibitions. You're seeing them dance in the blood rave. A dance club tends to be where people do tend to have some kind of sexual dancing or sexual behavior. But not only that, it's not just, free sex society, but it is a violent society that is feeding on the innocent, or at least this young man who's, however innocent he is in real life, he definitely doesn't seem to be a bad person, but he's just coming out to have a good time. And now he's going to be this horrific victim of violence. And when we get the introduction of Blade, all of a sudden the blood sprinkling stops. Everyone seems like they're having a good time. Our initial victim, who has been beat up already by the vampires, is trying to crawl and get away from them. And all of a sudden, all the vampires stop in fear. And Blade, who is standing completely still, clad in black, covered in armor, has appeared. And immediately the vampires go to attack him. He attacks back, and you see him use all of his incredible array of weapons. The vampires are exploding into ash and flame, and it's a really incredible action sequence. Now, I talked about this before in my video about storytelling through music. Now, if you note in this opening action sequence, there's incredible techno music for the vampires, who are dancing very sexually, very sensually during the blood rave, and then also very sadistically beating up our hero. And then we get another incredible techno song for when Blade is dispatching and killing all of these vampires. So in essence, sort of the fun party mood for both characters is established through techno music. But as this movie goes forward beyond this sequence, there is no fun techno music in all of the following action and scenes of violence in the movie. Now, I get to that in more detail in that video, and there'll be a link in the description. And at the end of the video, I'll have one of the bubbles linked to that video. But I'm just bringing this up now. This is an important part of defining our characters, that both the bad guys and our hero Blade, their fun time, their establishment comes with this techno music. And it just establishes this is what these people are comfortable with. This is what is fun for them. Blade, you can tell, is having a good time killing these vampires. And at the end of all of this violence, what you have is Blade basically killing or disabling every vampire in the room. And we see our initial character, the guy who's going to become a victim of these vampires, he's trying to run away, and Blade stops him and he checks him for bites. And you kind of realize not only has Blade saved his life, but he's also being very careful and making sure that he's not about to be another vampire running around in the world. And so what this tells you about Blade as a character is he's tactical, he's efficient, but also he's very contained. So while the rest of our vampires are, either shirtless or basically shirtless, they're all very free physically and they're very free sexually. Blade, on the other hand, he's very repressed, he's very contained. And much of this movie is about his self-repression, because he hates the fact that he is half vampire. And not only that, but he's compassionate and he's careful. He makes sure that this human lives. He's here to protect human beings. Even though he may not be the nicest person, he still has this compassionate value system that goes unspoken. It's purely visually that you see he has saved this man's life, but also he's making sure he's not going to become a vampire, because that is his life's purpose, to kill vampires. And then, okay, so this is how we define our characters. We've defined the characters. What's next? How does the action affect the story? Well, this action sequence is essentially the inciting incident that motivates the very next scene, which introduces our villain character, Deacon Frost. And Deacon Frost is called to a meeting with the Council of Vampires, and they're judging him for starting these blood rave clubs that have all been infiltrated by Blade, who's also killing their vampires. He's taken down the numbers. And this is the establishment of Deacon Frost's conflict with the council, and he's telling them, why are we hiding from humans? We are better than them, we're stronger than them, we should be top of the pecking order. And so this opening action sequence is not just there for kicks. It does, for the most part, just establish what our main character is about. But at the same time, it's a motivation for everything that follows. If Blade did not intervene and fight and kill vampires in the scene, we would not get Deacon Frost being criticized by the Council of Vampires, but also we wouldn't have this establishing of the Council of Vampires and how the hierarchy of the vampire society works. So I like that what we have here is we have this world building occurring. And so while in this first scene, the consequence, what affects the story, it's the violence against the vampires, I'm just going to dive a little bit into the next little action sequence, which is at the hospital, where one of the vampires that Blade burns survives. He doesn't burn to death. He doesn't burn completely to ash. He ends up going to the hospital, people don't realize that he's a vampire, that it's not known that vampires exist amongst the public. And he wakes up during the middle of a sort of post a DOA. They're just trying to cut him apart, and they think he's dead because he is a vampire. He has no pulse. They're trying to cut him up. He wakes up in the middle of an examination, bites a doctor, bites another doctor, and that doctor, her name is Karen, ends up being again saved by Blade, who had followed the body to the hospital to finish him off. And again, this vampire gets away, but when we see Blade looking down at Karen, who's on the floor, she's been bitten, blood's all over the place. We have this very artistic style of shooting where Blade's kind of in the corner and she's like in this kind of anime weird pose on the ground. And you see Blade has this flash. You know, the movie, although we have this opening action sequence, the movie starts off with the birth of Blade and the death of his mother. And so when Blade shows up to look over Karen, he has this brief subjective edit, this flash of his mother dying when he's looking down at Karen. So even though he has no words, there's a personal reaction to what he's seeing. And so he picks up Karen to try and save her life and brings her back to his base. So everything happening in this opening action sequence leads to everything that follows. So this opening action sequence is not just a dumb, cool action sequence to make you go, wow, mouth drool, well, I've had a good time. Granted, hopefully you did. Everything in the filmmaking is supposed to make you feel that way. But nonetheless, it still deeply affects the rest of the movie that follows. Because he saves Karen, Karen is integral in an entire subplot that leads to how Blade will defeat the vampires by the end of the movie. And now you got to watch the movie to see what I'm talking about. But I just really felt that Blade was the perfect kind of example that establishes the three elements of this. And not only that, let me come back to consequences, because it's not just consequences on the story. There's something to be understood about violence has consequences, and really good action movies try to convey that. They try to make you understand that, yes, you're watching fun action, but if you engage in this behavior, there are consequences. So while Blade saves the first guy from being bitten in the blood rave scene, he is not there early enough to save Karen immediately. So the violence has a consequence. Karen is horrifically bit and she's gonna die unless Blade saves her. She's gonna die and turn into a vampire. So without that concern, without a literal mortal concern, there's nothing to show Blade's level of compassion. And the deeper meaning, again, he's established as a non-sexual, completely covered, armored person. He's a person of a religious level of devotion to his craft, and he's completely repressed. And again, with the presence of Karen, who kind of reminds him of his mother. And what does that sound like? That kind of sounds like 80s and 90s movies when it's like a guy meets a girl who reminds him of his mother and then he marries her, which Freudian slip? I don't know. But again, this movie will end with a crucial scene that has enormous sort of sexual release for Blade later on with Karen, when she ends up curing herself, spoiler alert, she ends up curing herself and preventing the vampire virus from taking over her body. But then, in order to save Blade and save the world, offers herself to Blade to drink her blood so that he can heal in a time of crisis and defeat the bad guys. So, and that sequence is full of sexual tension, and it feels like a sexual scene, even though it's just Blade drinking blood. So, sex has an important thematic element to this movie, but it's just another thing that kind of represents where the character is. So Blade as a character begins the movie completely covered head to toe in armor and clothing. He's repressed. He has sunglasses on. He is untouchable. And by the end of the movie, he'll just be in pants and a vest and no glasses, and he'll have released a bit of this repression. So everything in the beginning of the movie has everything to do with the rest of the movie, but the deeper meanings of this movie delve into Blade having some level of self-acceptance for the fact that he's part vampire, because we establish in the beginning that he hates vampires and his pride and joy is killing them. But that also means he hates the part of himself that's a vampire. So he has to contend with this. So there's deeper meanings to the violence. There's deeper meanings to why he dispatches vampires the way he does it. And then when you look at how he behaves with everyone, it's largely because he does not like himself. So there's a lot going on with his character. Even though it's an action character, he has a lot going on beneath the surface. And I brought up Clint Eastwood. If you look at the Man with No Name trilogy, and I'm going to talk about the first movie as well, another trilogy. If you look at the first movie, Fistful of Dollars, which is an Italian spaghetti western version of the Akira Kurosawa movie Yojimbo. Essentially, a samurai comes into a town run by two corrupt gangs and pits them against each other for his own profit. This is what Clint Eastwood's Fistful of Dollars is, directed by the amazing Sergio Leone. You look at that movie, it's another movie that seems like it's just a shoot-'em-up western. The hero comes in to pit two gangs against each other and work for both of them covertly, causing more mayhem so that he can just make money off of these two gangs. But in the middle of those two gangs, there is this woman who has been essentially kidnapped by one of the gangs in a debt dispute, because in a gambling game, just one of the regular town citizens loses this gambling game, and the gang leader decides, I will take your wife as payment. And you see multiple times this little child, who is the son of the man and his wife, often crying and begging for his mother. And there's a point at which, even though Clint Eastwood is established as kind of an amoral character, he decides to rescue the woman and help her and her husband and her child escape. Meaning, and his only line explaining why, because they stop and, why are you doing this? Like, you were not like this for the rest of this movie. And you realize he has been watching this whole experience and feeling something about it, although he's not expressing it. And in this one scene, all he says is, I used to know someone who was a lot like you. And what he's talking about is himself. I was in this situation as a kid. And without saying any further words, you have to read between the lines, I knew someone who was a lot like you, meaning himself. And he's not allowing this to happen again. And this choice ends up getting him really baked into some serious trouble. So, and again, the way he rescues her is a huge, exciting action sequence, not unlike the Blood Rave. So again, action affects the story and speaks to the deeper meanings of the character. Clint Eastwood and Wesley Snipes' Blade both have deeply unspoken character arcs. They whatever they say, it's never directly referring to what their problem is, except for one particular scene. There's always one scene We just get that little hint as to what the character is all about. And if you look at the rest of the movie through the lens of that scene, you understand what the movie's really about from the character's point of view. And what is a story? A story is about a character, and a character is only formed out of conflict. So how do you define characters? In the action genre, they are defined by action. They're defined not by the spectacle of fighting, but by what they physically do, what you can visually perceive them doing. And as I always say in my movie reviews, it's not just visual in the sense that you have to see it, but you could be describing it to a blind person and they would understand what you're talking about. Where you say, dude, there's a vampire blood rave. Oh, yeah. And this guy's killing all these vampires and he saves this human, man. Oh, okay. And it turns out that this guy hates himself because he is also part vampire. Oh, man, okay. And so the whole movie is really, he's just like dealing with this stuff, but also there's this crazy action, man. It's so cool. So again, you are tantalized by the spectacle, but even the spectacle serves a function to tell the character's story. So that's sort of my first example, Blade, and with a little bit of extrapolation into Fistful of Dollars. My second example, Face Off. This is a movie that's near and dear to my heart. Face Off, starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, and directed by the amazing John Woo, famous action director from China, came over to America, made some really cool movies. I do think Face Off is the best that I've seen, although I still need to watch a lot of his work. But Face Off, this is a great movie. This is what I consider the Dark Knight of the 90s, because it's one of those movies with such a distinct hero and such a distinct villain. And then it's kind of Dark Knight meets Freaky Friday. We have this body swapping. Essentially, for those of you who don't know what Face Off is, this is a fantastic movie you got to check out. If you love action movies, you got to watch it. Face Off is about an FBI agent who's been hunting for this criminal for 10 years because the criminal killed his son. And he does catch him and nearly kills the guy, but while the criminal is in a coma, essentially higher levels of government discover that this criminal was planning a massive terrorist attack. And the only person who knows about this impending attack is the criminal's brother. But unfortunately, the guy is knocked out, so they can't send him in jail and just listen to his conversations. They need to send in someone who looks like him to trick the brother into saying exactly what's going on with this terrorist level event. And it ends up being that because John Travolta, whose name is John Archer, because he's been hunting for Castor Troy, Nicolas Cage's character, he's been hunting for him for 10 years. He knows basically everything about him. He knows how he talks. He knows how he walks. He knows what he likes to do. He knows his crime rap. He knows all of his associates. So it would be very easy for him, if he looked like Nicolas Cage, to go in and pretend to be him in order to get information out of the brother. And hence, this movie is both, like Blade, it's both action movie and a little bit of science fiction fantasy. So I want to talk again about the opening of the movie, because I really want you to watch this movie and judge it for yourself if you haven't seen it. But I'm going to spoil the opening because it's the opening of the movie. Why not? Literally the first scene of this movie, it's this beautiful, this kind of mood piece where we have this wonderful, childlike, tender music playing. Not childlike, but it's music that kind of makes you feel like a kid. It makes you feel like you're in a kind of wonderful time. John Travolta and his son are on a carousel, and they're just riding the unicorn. The son's having a great time. And out in the distance, Nicolas Cage, Castor Troy, is setting up a sniper rifle. He's got his sights on John Travolta, and he seems very cool and collected. And then he fires. John Travolta goes down with his son, and when John Travolta comes to, he realizes that he's been shot and that the bullet went through his chest and hit his son and killed his son. And he's holding his son, just desperate and sad, wondering how this happened. And we just get one look from Nicolas Cage, just of shame, like there's guilt, like he didn't want to kill this kid. And when we cut to the present, we get into this huge airport action chase sequence where basically Sean Archer is now in charge of the FBI, and he's leading this raid on an airport where Castor's trying to escape. And they basically catch him just when he's on a plane. The plane's about to take off. Sean Archer is in a helicopter. He takes over the helicopter and forces the helicopter to hit the flaps of the plane and disable its ability to fly, essentially forcing the plane to either stop or, as Castor also accelerates things, forces the pilot to drive the plane straight into a building. And this leads to a massive action sequence where Castor is shooting up the FBI people left and right. And what's important to note is that when this action sequence begins, there is an agent on the plane who's interacting with Castor. She's pretending to be this very kind of sultry flight attendant who's totally interested in Castor, and they're making out and everything. The whole time she's got a wire, she's recording what's going on. And when Sean Archer initially shows up, he shows up in a Humvee, and he's driving the Humvee right at the plane. He's playing chicken with a plane in a vehicle that can't actually stop the plane. This is how nuts he is. So what the action is telling us is that Sean Archer is so emotionally invested. He's so crazy with the need for justice. He's not looking for revenge necessarily, although he clearly wants it. He wants justice for his son. And even, again, let me step back another moment. Before we get to this action sequence, after the initial scene where, his son gets killed by Castor, we cut to 10 years later. He's in the office, and you see him rubbing his wedding ring, and he's just so emotionally devastated and yet focused and terrorized. He's just going through so much emotion, and he carries this emotion into this action sequence where you see he's nuts and willing to do all these crazy things to stop Castor from escaping, especially as you realize it's been a 10-year manhunt for this guy, where he's perhaps gotten close to catching him, or maybe even arrested him and he escaped. We don't fully know how bad this manhunt has gone on, but what we can tell is that Sean Archer is at his wit's end, and he'll do anything it takes to take down Castor Troy. But unfortunately, what the action reveals is, across the action sequence, when Castor is shooting down Sean Archer's men, Sean Archer he's devastated every time he sees one of the bad guys, because Castor still has a few of his own friends with him in this battle. Every time he sees one of the bad guys take down one of his men, he's devastated, and he's more motivated to catch them. And multiple times, Sean Archer tries to push people out of the way of certain death, and a few times he can't do it, and you just see in his face he reacts to the death. He reacts to his colleague getting shot in the ear, and he tries to save him and get him out of the way. So the action during the action sequence is telling you everything you need to know about this hero, that he's desperate to stop death. He's desperate to not lose people that he works with, that he cares about. And on the flip side, every single time we see Castor Troy, let's peel this back again. When we are initially reintroduced to Castor Troy, and he's meeting up with two of his minions, and he's meeting up with his brother. He comes out of a car and he's got a big trench coat now. He's not like this kind of covert looking guy from the opening scene. He's larger than life. He's taking drugs. He's totally in another headspace, you know what I mean? And visually speaking, there is a physical touch moment that defines both characters. That when we see Sean Archer on the carousel with his son, he does this little love touch, this face touch, just this kind of recognition that you're important to me. And Castor also has this. When he comes out of the car in slow motion with his, jacket blowing in the wind, and he's meeting his brother, he sees that his shoe's untied, and he kneels down and he chastises his brother for not tying his shoe, and he's tying it for him. And you see Alessandra Novola acting awkward, like, my brother's tying my shoe in front of these guys. But it's that's Castor's love touch, that Castor doesn't care about anyone in the world. As we'll see over the course of this movie, Castor will sacrifice everybody, and he'll kill former friends and associates because it's fun for him, except that the one person he cares about on Earth is his brother. And the way we visually show that, a physical action, is the tying of the shoe. And so in this opening massive plane sequence, his brother is the only one that he looks out for. But when the heat gets too hot and the brother is captured, Castor just has to escape. He has no choice. And in escaping, he's taking out so many of the FBI guys. And we get one of the first sort of standoff sequences where both men are pointing guns at each other, and they're talking and revealing that they know so much about each other. But what's important about this action sequence is, as much as Sean Archer has come to kill Castor Troy, he will settle for just capturing him. He does try to arrest him, but Castor pushes the sequence further by pulling out a blade and trying to stab Sean Archer, because it turns out they're both it turns out Castor's out of bullets, but Sean is not. And he tries to do this underhanded stab in the middle of this arrest attempt, and that's what leads to another little moment of violence where Sean ends up, during their action scene, they end up turning on this massive turbine. Who knows what it's there for? Maybe it's just a test. Maybe this is normal for airports. But during their little scuffle, they turn on this massive turbine engine, and Sean ends up kicking Castor into the jet stream, and Castor's blown violently away, smashed against this gate, and he believed to be dead, but actually knocked into a coma. But every single bit of this action sequence is designed to tell you about these characters, and that this is something from the commentary. So this is not, now we're passing my analysis, and now I can tell you there's a commentary on the DVD, on the Blu-ray, where director John Woo talks about what's important to him when it comes to making an action movie. And what he talks about is, when he was speaking with the writers and when he was working with the actors, it was so crucial that emotion is a part of the story, that there's an emotional reaction to everything that occurs. And to define these characters very distinctly, it's John Woo who asked for the love touch to the face, who asked for the little tying of the shoe. John Woo wanted these little emotional touchstones that, even if you're not feeling anything for it initially as an audience member, it'll register in your brain that later on in the movie, when these characters come head to head again, that it becomes a signal, especially when we get this face swapping, because Sean Archer takes on the face of Castor Troy. And while Sean Archer is in jail, trying to get information from Castor's brother. Castor wakes up from his coma and then takes Sean Archer's face and does the same surgery, and then takes over the FBI. So when these two characters are now living opposite lives, these physical touchstones become a key to proving that their character is who they are. So this is the fact that this is the director asking for these things. This is the director, and this is the director's job, is not just to make sure the action looks cool and that it's a spectacular sequence. But John Woo, one of the best action directors of all time, right? Is that not the truth from everyone who loves action movies so thoroughly and deeply, that John Woo is considered one of the, if not the best, one of the best action movie directors of all time? So if he's one of the best action movies directors of all time, and this is what matters to him, capturing the emotion and definition of characters and defining their character journeys through that emotion across a movie, let alone these individual action sequences and individual character scenes, that goes a long way of showing you, both as a storyteller or as just a fan of the genre, that goes a long way to tell you that storytelling is a part of action, and that action, when done correctly, when done by one of the best people who does this, emotion, story, these are things that matter to the action sequences. They're not just there for spectacle. They define the character and create all the circumstances for which the rest of the movie will occur. Because the director is what? The director is the audience. The director is the storytelling prism through which every choice in the movie is made. Every choice has to build the characters, create a connection to the audience, and get us from one scene to the next scene. You know, because, and I'm going to go back to what Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park, frequently are known to say, because one thing happens, another thing happens. Or this happens, therefore this happens. Or because this happens, another event happens. Because Castor Troy kills Sean Archer's son, Sean is unstoppably motivated to capture or kill Castor in revenge or justice, whichever one he'll take. And you see through the action sequence just how Sean will literally stop at nothing, no matter what it takes, except that he doesn't want his fellow men to die. And there's a scene that comes up after this action sequence when Castor is still believed to be dead, and, you know, all of his cronies are in jail. There's a scene following this opening action sequence where Sean returns to his office and the entire team is there, the entire team that's alive is there, and they cheer for him, and somebody sent a bottle of wine for him. And Sean, being Sean, is not happy. He is not happy because more agents had to die. And so everyone tells him to have a speech, and at first he says, I have nothing to say. And then he comes back and says, no, wait. And he picks up the bottle of wine or champagne, holds it up in the air and says, this is for the agents who died today so that we could accomplish this. And he lists their names. He knows them by name. And again, during the action scene, we saw him try to save them. We saw him emotionally affected by them dying. So what do we have in this whole opening? The action has defined our hero as so emotionally invested. Like he truly is full of compassion and heart and love and cares about everyone in his life. And the villain cares about nobody except for one person, his brother. And how does it affect the rest of the story? Sean is still not happy after the death of Castor. The what seems like the death of Castor Troy. He's still not happy. He's still miserable because it meant the loss of other lives. And his misery spreads to the misery of the rest of the office, where even the office is like, but dude, but we won. But to Sean, it's like, but we won at the cost of more lives. And the whole reason I'm hunting for this guy is to stop people from dying. And so, there's a lot of emotional depth to this character, and there's a lot of suffering for this character that he's going through. So, and this is just establishing his character, that when he's flipped, when he's Castor Troy, and as Castor Troy pretending to be Sean Archer with John Travolta's face, he also runs missions, and he later on ends up leading the mission to deactivate his bomb, the whole terrorist threat that motivates the whole sci-fi face swapping in the first place. As Sean Archer, Castor stops his own bomb, and then we get a return scene, a repeat scene of him walking to the office and everyone's cheering him. And this time around, because it's the villain, it's not the hero, yes, he enjoys the adulation, and he can't even pretend to be Sean Archer for 5 seconds, because he's got to take it all in, love it, and then he grabs the ass of an attractive colleague. And, she's both shocked, perturbed, and maybe she appreciates it. It's such a mix of feelings that comes out of her. Because you see that this whole team respects him and looks up to him, and they don't know that he's not the same person right now. But this is how all of these scenes from the opening, they have all these definitions of character, affects the story, and the consequence of violence. Violence, although the villain does not care who he hurts, the consequences, well, other people do. The hero fights the villain because he does not want that consequence to occur, but nonetheless it does. If you fight with monsters, ye shall become a monster. If you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. So, but this character definition is important for following scenes. It's not just there for the individual moment. It's there, just like with Blade and his repression, it's there because later on in the movie, it has a consequence and it has a meaning to the character, and it will take the entire movie's journey of both characters seeing the other person's life. When Castor is pretending to be Sean and he goes into the house and he romances the wife, he ultimately has a scene where the wife takes him to the cemetery to visit the son, and he has for one moment, you see in his face the guilt and the discomfort of being there, because as we know from the opening scene, this is his one guilt, his one shame. It's not just that he wanted to kill Sean Archer, but it's that he didn't want to kill the son. That was something he didn't want to do. And you can infer for yourself. What I like about the movie is that we don't actually know all the details of what happened between here. But I think what would make a good show is actually, you could have a whole 10 seasons of Face Off. If this was a television show, you could have a whole 10 seasons of that manhunt and every iteration of how it occurs and the different villains and side characters and how they all clash and meet with each other. And it would be the 10th season that would be, now we're going to do the face swap, and you can have a real episodic examination of everything that these characters did and lived with. I think this Face Off could easily be a great television show if done properly, because there's just so much meat, there's so much juicy stuff, there's so much juicy emotion, but it does work perfectly as an action movie, as one solid adventure to go on, where you see what these characters are going through. And again, the love touches matter. there is an action sequence later where Castor Troy's brother is caught in the crossfire between, Sean and Castor, now face swapped, trying to kill one another, and it ends up that Castor Troy's brother dies. And it's the last scene we'll see where Castor sees his brother's shoe is untied and he kneels down to tie his shoe one more time. And he's so devastated that he can no longer really pretend to be Sean Archer anymore. When an agent comes and say, "Hey, why are you upset? It's just Castor's brother." And he just immediately shoots him in the head. So, and it just tells you that, again, despite his goal of pretending to be the hero, this emotional event, this death, the consequence of violence, means so much to the character that he breaks character. He breaks pretending to be the hero because of this emotional moment, So action has consequences. The action has consequences that affect the rest of the story. And Face Off, directed by John Woo, one of the greatest action movie directors of all time. John Woo cares about emotion and the character journey and how the characters are affected by what happens. So again, I just like action movies that are dumb and stupid. Well, that's fine. You can like that. But that doesn't mean that's what the best action movies are made out of. And again, I do compare Face Off to The Dark Knight, where you look at The Dark Knight and the Joker loves killing people and Batman does everything he can to prevent people from dying. And because it's the superhero genre, he can actually do that for the most part. As long as he's involved, he can prevent it from happening. However, it still ends with the consequences of all the violence. And Harvey Two-Face, who is a hero at the start of the story, becomes a villain because every single death and every single bit of violence that the Joker commits, although it's an entertaining sequence, it all leads to the transformation of Harvey Dent into going from Gotham's White Knight to being Two-Face. And it's all hinges on the death of Rachel Dawes, who is the mutual love interest. We have this little love triangle between Batman, Maggie Gyllenhaal's Rachel Dawes, and Aaron Eckhart's Harvey Dent. When she dies, Batman further commits to being Batman, the same way Sean Archer further commits to his mission of protecting life. And on the flip side of that, we have unfortunately Harvey Dent so devastated that he goes to the dark side. So, but that's part of the thematic buildup and the point of the movie. So emotion matters. Action affects the rest of the story. It's really something that's crucial to understand. And my final example for how this rubric works, one of my favorite action movies, these are all some of my favorite action movies, Casino Royale. I do think this is still the best James Bond film. When I made 007, I Only Need One, I was not a huge James Bond fan. I loved the Pierce Brosnan movies, but that's all I had. And when I was asked to direct that little short film, I made it my mission to watch every single James Bond movie. I still missed two of them. The original Casino Royale from the 60s and Diamonds Are Forever, which is technically not canon to the series. And it was happenstance. I didn't mean to skip them. I just didn't get to it. But I've made it my mission to watch every single one of those movies and listen to the theme songs every single day so that I always had James Bond in my head when I was making that short film. So if you see that movie and you enjoy it, I hope you do. It's the fruit of, it was a labor of love made from family and friends, and I still very much appreciate that experience. But if you see it, then me as a director, I'm coming into the making of that short film already knowing the stuff that I'm talking about in this episode. But not only that, I'm coming into it really doing my homework. And that's what this podcast is. This is a compendium of homework so that you filmmakers out there who are new, or you audience members who just kind of want to have a better understanding of your favorite genre can have that understanding. And if you're a filmmaker or a storyteller, take that understanding into your work and make your work better. Because you got to remember that the story is not the plot. The plot is just there to motivate character behavior. So when it comes to Casino Royale, James Bond is famously very plot-heavy movies where James Bond will go from action scene to action scene to action scene to action scene. And it is a lot of spectacle and fun, but I want you to understand that just because that's how it comes off does not mean that there isn't more to it than that. So let's look at the opening. The opening scene of Casino Royale it's a black and white sequence where James Bond has infiltrated the office of a traitor to the MI6 branch where all the spies are from, where the military intelligence goes. There's a traitor. He's infiltrated his office. The traitor shows up into the office. He tries to pull his gun on James Bond, but Bond already has the ammunition in his hand, so the gun is empty. So despite having the gun, he has nothing to defeat Bond with. And this whole dialogue between them is about, well, how did you find out I'm here, and why would M send you? Traditionally she would send a 00 to kill me if this issue was that high up in the chain. And so Bond establishes, well, I have killed one person, and he's killed the contact. And so intercut with this black and white sequence is an even dirtier, more film grainy black and white sequence where James Bond is fighting with the informant in a bathroom, and it looks like they're somewhere out in a perhaps a vacation spot, who knows, but because it's a huge bathroom, it's a very nice bathroom, but it looks like it's in some kind of vacation spot. But anyway, and just that by itself, let me make another little aside here. The fact that we're already in a black and white sequence, and then we cut to a dirty film grainy black and white sequence, meaning that we're intercutting with a flashback. Presumably this is already the flashback, but we're going into another flashback within the flashback. And so artistically, there's a lot being said with how beautiful everything looks and pristine in our flashback. But when we go into this film grainy flashback, it's the camera style is very rough, and the camera's shaking a lot. And we're subjectively with Bond as he's smashing through everything, trying to fight this guy. And it is a tough battle that ends with Bond having to essentially drown the man to kill him. And you see in Bond's face, he is affected by having to kill the man. And that's even referred to in our main scene where the camera's very still and the black and white's very smooth and crisp. And the traitor is telling Bond, oh, he made you feel it, did he? And then says, no worries, the second one is, and Bond shoots him in the head, he falls over. And Bond says, considerably. And the sort of the unspoken word, the second kill is easier than the first. And Bond is agreeing with him. And then we cut to probably the best gun barrel sequence of all time, which is we cut back to the dirty film grain flashback. And even though Bond attempted to drown the informant is still alive, and he grabs his gun and he's about to shoot Bond, and Bond shoots him first. And that's when we get the best gun barrel intro of all time, which I wish the Bond movies that followed had done this. I really feel like that would be the best way to define all of Daniel Craig's movies, is that if only every single Bond movie started with that, every single opening starts with an action sequence that still ends with Bond shooting down the barrel of a gun, I think that would have been a great signature to his franchise. Unfortunately, I was not a fan of how the franchise movies went beyond that. I did like Skyfall. There were parts of No Time to Die and Spectre that I liked, but I did feel like it just wasn't for me. It wasn't the James Bond I wanted. But to me, Casino Royale was such a perfect jumping off point. But right off with this opening action sequence, right, we have the emotional journey of James Bond, where the first action sequence, he really feels killing this guy, and then you realize that he's accepted what he has to do by the time he's killing the traitor in his office, that he's become the dispassionate Bond. But we're also establishing that this James Bond in particular is far more comfortable with death. I think what's great about Pierce Brosnan's Bond, and really all the Bonds that preceded Daniel Craig, with the exception of Sean Connery, I think what's great about so many of the middle Bonds between Connery and Craig is that when it came to death, when it came to killing someone, all of them, they didn't want to do it, and you knew they didn't want to do it just by their performance. Like, I don't want to kill this person, but I have to, and so I'll have a drink and make a joke just to kind of let off some steam, but the truth is this is not something I really want to do. But in the case of Daniel Craig's Bond, he's very much defined by his complete dispassionate attitude toward death. He's a very different Bond than the other ones, and this is further expressed with the next action sequence that I think is very important to talk about. So what have we gone through so far, right? Every movie, we define our character. How does the action affect the story? What's the meaning or the consequences? So our character is defined as, at first, having a hard time killing someone, and then kind of getting comfortable with it to some level. But not only that, this is the mission that makes him James Bond. So he's not a 007 until he's made these 2 kills. So this mission is what leads him to being a 00 and being in the very next mission where he's working with another 006. I think it's 006. And this 00, when we're in the Madagascar parkour sequence, we start out, there's a whole group of people. It's one of those, gambling fights where it's a mongoose versus a snake or whatever the heck it is. I forget exactly what it is, or is it 2 snakes fighting? Either way, it's just one of those things that you see. It's not, you don't see it so much in America. In America, we're known for the dog fights, but in other countries, they use a lot of other different animals. So here in this Madagascar sequence, we're seeing everyone shouting and chanting over, shouting and cheering and booing over the battle between these animals. And the whole time, or during the sequence, James Bond and another agent are doing a reconnaissance mission. They're watching this one guy who's got a backpack and he seems kind of intense, and they're watching him where he's going. And it's so loud that the other agent is touching his ear, and Bond's literally telling him, stop touching your ear. You're just giving away that you're an agent right now. And Bond, you see, is completely cool, and he's in a position where he can really see everything that's going on. And the other agent is in a position where he's closer to the guy, but also he's in the middle of the crowd, so he hasn't placed himself very well. Because as soon as he's touching his ear, the guy sees him, and he looks at him, and the guy and our other agent just looks like a deer in headlights, and it's like, you've exposed the whole situation. And so our villain that they're hunting for goes running, and this is the parkour sequence. And this actor who plays the bad guy, I think he was famous for parkour. I think that's how he got into the movie, something like that. And essentially, parkour was very new to people at the time. It had started in France. This actor is French. It was a entirely new movement that the world wasn't used to. You maybe see it a little bit online, but most people didn't know about it. And Casino Royale was the blockbuster movie that introduced the whole planet to parkour. And you see this guy, he's so talented, all these amazing moves that he does. This is an amazing stunt talent, this actor. And what we get here now, again, how does the action define the character? And how, not only am I looking at how does the action sequence affect the story, we're looking at how did we get into the action sequence in the first place. This is a reconnaissance mission, right? Just like with Blade, how did we get into the action sequence? Vampires are partying, and then they start getting violent, and they start trying to eat a person. And if they weren't doing that, there would be no reason for Blade to intervene. So when we look at, and same how with Castor Troy, if he didn't try to assassinate Sean and miss and kill his son, the story wouldn't happen. So the consequence of the violence is what leads to more violence. Violence begets violence. This is a principle as much as it's a saying. So right here in this opening, how did we get into this action scene? Is that these guys are doing a reconnaissance. They're trying to capture the guy alive. Bond literally says, I need him alive, so don't draw your gun. He literally tells the guy not to draw his weapon. But it ends up becoming this whole chase sequence where the guy knocks our incompetent agent straight into the pit with the other animals. And who knows what happens to him. It doesn't matter. Bond just leaves. He doesn't care. He's got to get this guy. That's their mission. And what we get over the action sequence is not only is it spectacular, it's fun to look at, but we're defining our characters, right? So while the opening scene is what gets Bond to be a 00, this scene is defining exactly James Bond's characteristics when it comes to the rest of the movie. That our parkour guy, he's slick, he's smooth, he can get anywhere really quickly, slip in and out. And James Bond, he's not slick, but what he is unstoppable. He will stop at nothing, but he also does it dispassionately. So while, parkour guy is hopping fences and rolling over things and doing perfect balletic smooth landings into a construction site, James Bond just takes over a tractor and smashes through the construction site. And you see this over and over again where the parkour guy does a slick move and James Bond does something much more rushed and much more coarse. And so his character is defined by, he's not smooth like this guy. He does not have the parkour skill, but he's unstoppable. He will literally stop at nothing to accomplish his mission. And that will be his quality all the way to the end of the movie, where, he, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen Casino Royale, he will fall in love and get betrayed by the woman that he loves. But you see that his unstoppable nature never goes away, except that, it's not until the love story where finally there's a death that breaks him. So, but this whole sequence really, really defines James Bond's character. And when the bad guy gets away, he ends up escaping to the embassy, which is a no-no zone for the 00 operations. But James Bond goes in there anyway because why? He's unstoppable. He's uncompromising. It doesn't matter what the bad guy does, he will get that bad guy. But it all ends with literally everyone in the embassy, all the security people being alerted and triggered, and they're trying to protect their guy. And James Bond is the from their perspective, he's the white devil stepping in, doing something he's not supposed to be doing. And all they want him to do is stop, and he'll go to jail, and it's going to be bad for Bond and the British government. And Bond manages to get the bad guy's bag. But because he's cornered, he ends up deciding to just shoot the bad guy and then blow up. There's conveniently a stack of fuel for him to shoot, and he shoots a stack of fuel. There's an explosion, and he uses that distraction to get away. But what follows is a scene where James Bond looks at the phone and he looks at the previous message. So before this entire action sequence started, Bond watched as the guy at the pit where the whole animal fight was happening, he watched him receive a message. So once Bond gets clear and away from everybody, he pulls the phone out of the bag and he looks at the last message, and it's just this code word, ellipsis. What does that mean? What's that lead to? And so the very following scene, we're introduced to M going to her office, and she's looking at the news, and the news shows a picture of James Bond. He's exposed to the world, and not only that, he caused this heinous crime of blowing up an embassy, and now he's facing termination or suspension. And when M gets into her office, James Bond is waiting for her. So the skill established from the very opening scene is reestablished again. James Bond can get anywhere because why? Because he's uncompromising. But because of the destruction he caused in Madagascar, M has no choice but to suspend him. And she says, I should fire you, but I'm suspending you. So go stick your head in the sand somewhere until I figure out what to do with you. And James Bond accepts, seemingly casually. And this whole scene, he's sitting behind her computer, and she has no idea what he's doing. And then when he leaves the scene, she goes over and looks at her computer, and he was using her access information to track the message of the phone to this spot, and I think it's the Florida Keys. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, it's another vacation, or it's the Bahamas. He tracks the phone message to another phone in the Bahamas, and he's quietly letting her know that he's still on the job, that yes, he fucked up, but he's still on the job, and he's letting her know where he'll be. So, everything affects everything. Although, this version of James Bond does not have the emotional expression of John Travolta's Sean Archer from Face Off, nor does he have the sexual repression of Wesley Snipes' Blade. He doesn't have these self-hating baggages of the previous two movies I brought up, but he's a completely different character from the other characters. And so I brought up the love story, right, which this movie ends with. And I'm just going to spoil the ending a bit just to make my point, is that everything James Bond does, I've already established how one thing leads to another, right? The action scene has consequences that affects where the character goes, but James Bond uses those consequences to keep pursuing the mission. And this is his character, that he just won't stop until the job is done. That's who this version of James Bond is. And actually, it's something that we know James Bond is across all the movies, but it's very much being cemented in this movie that this is the Daniel Craig James Bond. He's always on the job. He has a lot more in common with Christian Bale's Batman than he does with the other James Bond. He's just always on the job. Even when he seems to not be working, he's working. So he's so persistent. But again, each action sequence, how we get into that action sequence and how we get out of that action sequence affects the plot and affects the story. And what we're seeing here is, although the opening sequence establishes how he has a lot of emotion when he kills the first guy, and really no emotion for anyone he kills after that. Even a married woman that he seduces in the Bahamas to get to the holder of the phone that sent the ellipsis message to our parkour guy. That's a mouthful, right? Even the wife of the guy he's hunting down in the Bahamas, she gets killed by the bad guys off camera. Even that doesn't really shake him. He's not happy about it, but he understands it's a consequence of what he's been doing. Eventually, James Bond is put on the Casino Royale mission. We get this whole hour-long build-up to the Casino Royale mission, where he's partnered with someone from the British bank who will specifically be involved with funding James Bond's poker skills in the Casino Royale game, where James Bond essentially has to beat a terrorist or a guy who is involved with terrorists who's trying to win a lot of money so that he can complete a terrorist operation. And James Bond, his mission is to defeat him in this poker game and also figure out who his contacts are and expose his network. And over the course of this movie, he falls in love with the banker. And unfortunately, so spoiler alert, by the end of the movie, it turns out that the banker was involved with the bad guys of this movie from the beginning. But, her last acts are that she's used by the criminals because they know he's in love with her. They use her as a human shield and then throw her into an elevator, and this is in Venice, so it's in the water, and this building starts getting destroyed. They lock her in an elevator that ends up falling into the water as a means of distraction for James Bond. But James Bond's uncompromising, and so he kills all the bad guys first, and then his last act is to try and save the woman he loves. And ultimately, he can't. And so the movie begins with him having a difficult time with death and ends with him again being broken again, where it's like, Jesus, I thought I was okay with this and could handle this. But now I fell in love with the enemy and she died in my arms. And now I'm broken again. So this movie, although he's a completely different character, it does have an emotional journey for our hero. And I've had friends and I've seen reviews say, the romantic part of the movie when James Bond defeats the initial Casino Royale guy, and then we get this sort of 10 minutes of romance between Bond and the banker, played by the wonderful Ava Green. It's often said this part of the movie is kind of boring, it's kind of slow. I've always enjoyed it, but especially upon rewatches since seeing it the first time, I enjoy it even more because I know it's not real. I know that she's just working for the bad guys. This is all just a distraction until they get the Casino Royale money and she can give it to the bad guys. So to me, I find it like there is a tension of a moment when think they're okay, and she sees a guy with he is wearing glasses, but only one of the lenses is in, and she's creeped out by that. So there's a little underlying tension. But even before this whole love sequence and the dramatic ending, what gets us into that love story? So James Bond, when he's trying to beat this poker game, the villain attempts in various ways to kill James Bond across the poker game because he is winning, he is doing well, and it seems to be the only course of action is to take James Bond out so that he can't beat them at this game. And it's in one of these action sequences where, although he's established himself with the banker, they have kind of a spicy first conversation where they don't seem to like each other, although he is very forward with I find you attractive, but she doesn't. And it's the classic James Bond scenario where it's the red herring, it's the bad girl. There's the good Bond girl and the bad Bond girl. You think she's the good Bond girl, turns out she's the bad Bond girl. But one of the sequences is that the investor who's funding the villain is Mads Mikkelsen. The investors, who are from Madagascar, or they're from Africa, I forget exactly where, but we see them in the beginning. The investors have shown up because they know that James Bond has compromised. Well, they don't know it's James Bond, but they know that multiple missions that our villain Mads Mikkelsen's on, they know that multiple of his missions of his attempts to score lots of money for this terrorist group. They know it's been thwarted, and they consider him to be a failure, and he can't be trusted. But after threatening Mads Mikkelsen's life, they leave his hotel room, and they catch James Bond and the banker, Ava Green. They see them, they see the earpiece. Again, it's that earpiece that exposes him. And it begins the exciting stairwell action sequence where they're trying to kill James Bond. Now, again, consequences of action. These people are trying to kill. This is not, fun. It's presented in a fun way. The music is very heart-pumping and engaging. But this is a battle to the death. And James Bond is fighting not only for his life, but this is the first time he's fighting for Ava Green's life. And this entire action sequence ends up being one of the scenes that breaks down Ava Green's character. So even though he does save her, it is a harrowing action sequence where it's the three, or technically four of them. It's two bad guys and our two heroes fumbling and fighting all the way downstairs. And James Bond is constantly going back and forth between defending her and fighting them. And so he's between defense and offense, and it's hard for him to really get a winning move because he has to stop her from being killed too. So the excitement of the action sequence is also the kind of almost situational comedy, but it's the situational issue where he's got to look out for her at the same time. But when he kills both of the bad guys and it's right in front of her, and she feels like there's blood on her hands because she's participated in this, the consequences of the action is that she was not built for this. She is not the kind of person who either wants to be involved or is comfortable being involved with violence. And so the following scene is in their hotel room where she is trying to take a shower and she has blood on her hands. It's like, I can't get the blood off. I can't get it off. And he, being dispassionate, comforts her and holds her and makes her feel safe. So we established earlier he's attracted to her, and although they have a contentious relationship, this action sequence motivates her to be comfortable with him because she realizes he is a protector. He's not just here to attempt to bang her over the course of the job, that he really cares about her life. And it's what brings them together emotionally for the first time. So an action sequence, it's not just there to be spectacular. It's there to move the story along. Yes, the plot's being moved along because James Bond has killed the investors to Mads Mikkelsen, but the character is being moved along as well. And even though this is a plotty situation, the actors playing these machete-wielding investors, they are characters themselves, where the way they threaten Mads Mikkelsen is that they have his girlfriend and they make her put out her arm, and they're about to cut it off. And one of them tells the girlfriend, "Did you notice that he didn't tell me to not cut off your arm?" And so as much as he's the bad guy, he's also pointing something out. He's a person that has a perspective. And, his value of this man is not just that he's failed him, but that he's a failure as a lover as well. He doesn't even care about the girl he's with, which says a lot about this guy. Regardless of whatever crimes he's committed, it just says that he's attentive. He pays attention, and he has a point of view on even what's going on in this room. So this is good character writing and all of that. But again, it's all character. An action movie is not just to be dumb and stupid. The best action movies are full of emotion. They're full of thoughtful character development where even the action plays a role in how the characters transform. So again, this is not new to action movies. You look at the Star Wars movies, there's the whole romance between Han Solo and Princess Leia really takes place in the second movie, where they are by themselves and they're going through various action sequences. They keep having to look out for each other, and it's that kind of real life thing where how do you know that someone's truly your friend or truly a good family member? It's that when you experience hard times, they're there for you. So action scenes are not just spectacle, but you're seeing who cares about who. Just like with Castor Troy and his brother, you see who cares about who at the end of or during the action sequence. And whatever happens at the end of that action sequence, those characters are the ones we're going to watch how they're affected, and how they're affected is going to affect the rest of the movie. So without this action sequence, Ava Green and Daniel Craig's characters cannot fall in love. They needed one action sequence that it shows Ava Green the person that she's with. The person she's with is not a bad man. He's looking out for her. And not only that, the consequences of the action scene. She's emotionally devastated by watching two men killed in front of her and feels like there's blood on her hands. And he is not emotionally devastated, but he compassionately he cares about her. He doesn't want her to feel alone in this moment, because he knows how he felt in the beginning of the movie, but also he knows that this is who he is and this is not who she is, but he cares about her anyway. And it's not something he judges. He doesn't judge. He totally accepts and opens his arms to her, and that the consequences of the violence lead to the beginning of the love story. So without that action sequence, we don't get the whole love sequence where they think that all the bad guys are defeated and James Bond and Ava Green are going on vacation, and then, oh no, she's the bad guy. So he doesn't try to kill her right away, but he knows he's pissed at her. But when the final action scene ends with her dying, you see he's devastated again. So the whole movie is about breaking an unbreakable man. What we think is an unbreakable person of James Bond, he can be broken again. And that's what he learns about himself by the end of the movie. Although the front of the movie establishes this dispassionate killer, the end of the movie reminds you, and even that middle sequence where they have beginnings of the falling in love. These sequences tell you who the character is. You can look at superhero movies, and that's the fundamental basics of good versus evil. The hero is going to save innocent people, and the bad guy is going to kill innocent people. And that's a fundamental good versus evil, easy to understand. But when it comes to action movies, when it comes to the absolute best action movies, Blade, Face Off, Casino Royale, these are some of the most successful action movies of all time, yes? Directed by some of Stephen Norton did make one movie after Blade, but he hasn't done much. But other than that, John Woo, and I'm forgetting the name of the director of Casino Royale. The director of Casino Royale was also the director of GoldenEye, which was the reboot of James Bond featuring Pierce Brosnan. So not only does he have a success record with James Bond, but he is also, again, he's one of the great action movie directors, regardless of whether his whole filmography shows that. The fact that GoldenEye and Casino Royale, these are two of the most successful James Bond movies of all time. The fact that Casino Royale itself is most people's favorite James Bond movie with Daniel Craig. I think a lot of people still love Skyfall. I think Skyfall is some people's favorite. But without question, I think it's I believe, it might just be me, that in general, people know that Casino Royale is technically the best movie. But it's the best movie because character is an integral part of the action, and there's consequences to it, and the action affects the rest of the story, Without one scene, we don't get the next scene. Without one action sequence, the character doesn't move forward. And when we look at the meaning behind the consequences, this movie is all about a man who is seemingly unbreakable, unshakable, unstoppable, that the movie will break him again by the end of the movie. So, action is an integral part of telling stories. And I just really wanted to get through that. I hope you enjoyed these examples. This is what I have to say. And this is, again, I'll be talking about more action movies, but I may not directly refer to this rubric. But I want you to understand that those three questions: how does the action define the character? How does the action affect the rest of the story? What's the meaning and or consequences of the violence? Those three things are what we look at as a director of movies. That's what we look at. How does the action affect the character? The character is what the story's about. The conflict is what defines the character. Conflict isn't always action, but it can be represented through action. So the conflict, the contentious relationship between Bond and Ava Green fades away or smooths out a bit better because of the stairwell action sequence. They become closer because of that sequence. So it's just something to think about. If you're a storyteller in any medium, if you're a storyteller and you have this whole time told yourself, action movies, big, dumb, stupid, I like. But if you're a storyteller, I say it's really not okay for you to think that. Or you can think that, but at least know the truth. And the truth is that John Woo, the director of the best James Bond movies and the director of Blade, all of these and the writer, David S. Goyer, all of these filmmakers who committed to these movies, 3 of the most successful action movies ever made, these guys all cared about storytelling and character. And so the problem with movies today is I think people have lost touch with this fundamental knowledge that used to be something that filmmakers would vet other filmmakers. Like, if you didn't have this fundamental understanding, if that's not how you told stories from the script stage, or how you use the costumes to communicate where the character's at emotionally, every single level of storytelling, people used to be vetted by those understandings. And the fact of the matter is that vetting system seems to be gone. Now it's all been washed away for social media, popularity. We're stuck in high school with this whole popularity contest, and we're wondering why movies suck. And movies suck because people have forgotten this valuable principle that even an action movie is a form of storytelling, that the emotions that the character go through, the emotional experience, the emotional journey, the audience is paying for the spectacle, but they expect, it's unspoken, it's the unspoken agreement between filmmaker and audience. The unspoken agreement is that the story better be good, because I'm committing to sit here and watch this. So the story better be good, not the plot, the story. Now again, you hear movie reviewers left and right talk about plot as if they understand what the fuck that means. And excuse me for my language, but that's how much it means to me. What is plot? It is nothing but a motivation for story. And if you do not understand that, you are screwing up your movie right away. Story is all about the characters, their inner conflicts, where they're going, where they're going to be, where they came from, how it all intersects and how it all builds to the ending, and what this journey means to the character. It's all valuable. And if you don't understand those things, you are going into the storytelling or movie making process without the tools necessary to achieve what you want to achieve. You look at Quentin Tarantino's movies. Yes, they're incredibly entertaining, but it's all character driven. The character is motivated, has a reason for doing what they're doing, and the action has consequences on the main character and any character that they care about. So this is what I wanted to talk about. This is the rubric through which the lens through which I'll be looking at every action movie. I may not say these 3 questions aloud, but when I talk about action movies in future episodes, this is what I'm looking at. This is how I'm judging the action movie, and this is why I'm talking about it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was enlightening. I'm sorry if there was no editing, because I didn't want to. But I hope you learned something. I hope you got something out of this. And please remember, homework matters. You're a storyteller, homework matters. Your homework is to know your genre and to know the journey of your character. And if you're an audience member, now you know a little bit about why. This is why I made Why It's Great. This action movies is an extension of why it's great. There's a why for why you love your favorite movies. And it's not obvious. Even though it's happening right in front of you. You may have stepped into the movie because you love the action or you love the sci-fi concept. But the thing you don't even realize is what's getting you to the end of the movie is that you are relating to the main character or the villain, and you're watching their emotional experience. And it's no different from when you're a kid and you watch your parents go through something, or you go through something yourself, and you're going through a ride it has losses, it has gains, you have wins, you have failures, and a movie is just telling you, it's just showing you one character's journey through a specific issue or a specific lifelong concern. And so a drama does this more directly with just characters talking for the most part, most of the time. A comedy does this with comedic sequences. Every genre, the drama is told through the genre. So the genre is just the facade or the mechanism through which you get the story. But at the end of the day, it's all about story. And you won't love the movie unless it does have a good story that's well told. So that's what I got to say for today's episode. I hope you liked it. I hope you like future episodes. I'm going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles soon, so look forward to that. I absolutely think that's one of the greatest action movies ever made. And I'm talking about the 1990 one, not that Michael Bay sequel. I love Michael Bay movies, but I'm not a fan of CGI turtles. But anyway, that's what I have to say. Welcome to Action Movies, Storytelling Through Action. Now you know why I look at movies the way I look at them. And in future episodes, even if I don't say these 3 questions, this is how I'm judging the action movie. So thanks for watching, and I hope I see you next time. Aloha, and take care.
All those bullets, and I only need one.